Hey guys, it's Kingdom Orange 2 here, and welcome back to my channel. So originally I told you guys I wasn't planning on doing the Little Mermaid, but since everyone in the comments seems to absolutely love this fairy tale, I decided to go ahead with her video. Now, unlike previous entries in this series, I will first tell the story of the Hans Christian Andersen version of the Little Mermaid, then compare all of the animated Little Mermaids to it, and end with my rankings. There is a bit of a complicated reason as to why I decided to do this, but just bear with me because this is the first video where I really tried to give you as many animated versions as I could find. So with that finally all out of the way, let's get right into it. The Little Mermaid. The 1837 fairy tale tells the story of a young mermaid princess who resides in an underwater kingdom along with her father, the Sea King, her 5 older sisters, and her grandmother. When each daughter turns 15, she is permitted to swim to the surface for the first time and catch a glimpse of the world above. When the Little Mermaid's turn arrives, she watches a birthday celebration being held on a ship in honor of a handsome young prince and begins to fall in love with him. A violent storm then hits and the Little Mermaid saves the prince from drowning. She places him on the shore near a temple where a young woman finds him. Unfortunately though, the prince never sees the Little Mermaid or even realizes that it was her who originally saved his life. The Little Mermaid then goes to her grandmother and asks her if humans can live forever. Her grandmother explains that while humans do have a shorter lifespan than a mermaid's 300 years, their bodies contain an eternal soul that lives on in heaven. While once mermaids turn 300, they turn to sea foam and cease to exist. Wanting both the prince and an eternal soul, the Little Mermaid visits the Sea Witch, who sells her a potion in exchange for her tongue. The Sea Witch also warns the Little Mermaid that she will only obtain a human soul if the prince agrees to fall in love and marry her. Otherwise, at dawn on the first day, after he marries someone else, the Little Mermaid will die and dissolve into sea foam. The Little Mermaid takes the potion and swims up to the shore. The prince, mesmerized by her beauty, finds the Little Mermaid and brings her to his castle. As the days pass on, the Little Mermaid becomes the prince's confidant and accompanies him on many of his outings. He tells the Little Mermaid that even though his parents are pushing him to marry the princess of a neighboring kingdom, he will not, as he has love only for the young woman from the temple who he believes had rescued him. However, when the prince finds out that the young woman from the temple and the princess are the exact same person, he sets up a royal wedding. On the night of the wedding, the Little Mermaid sisters rise out of the water holding a dagger that the Sea Witch has given them in exchange for their long hair. They tell the Little Mermaid that if she kills the prince and lets the blood drop onto her feet, she will become a mermaid again. The Little Mermaid takes the dagger and heads to the prince's bedchambers, but after seeing the sleeping prince lying with his new wife, she can't bear the thought of killing him and throws the dagger and herself into the water as dawn breaks. The story ends with, instead of the Little Mermaid dying, she becomes a spirit known as the Daughters of the Air, who tell her that in 300 years after performing many good deeds, she will finally be able to receive her soul and rise up to heaven. So usually with these videos, I prefer to go in alphabetical order, but for The Little Mermaid, I've decided to start with Disney because it's influential for many of the entries on this list in one way or another. Now, most of you already know, but Disney's Little Mermaid follows a young princess named Ariel who falls in love with the human Prince Eric and signs a contract with the evil sea witch Ursula to trade her voice in exchange for a pair of human legs. Since Disney is a family-friendly company, they changed a whole lot of the original fairy tale's plot points, such as removing the religious aspects of the story and getting rid of the violent scenes, like when the Little Mermaid cuts off her tongue, or the mention of how the Little Mermaid's feet are so painful when she walks that they bleed. And just like any other Disney film, the movie ends with a happily ever after, with Ariel and Eric getting married and sailing off into the sunset. Now, since this movie is so iconic, certain details and plot points are often copied or influenced in other Little Mermaid retellings. For example, subsequent films will usually give their version of the Little Mermaid a pet sidekick similar to Flounder, or will end their stories with their Little Mermaid marrying the prince. A lot of times, companies will even copy Ariel's very recognizable color scheme, but this is something that is mostly done for Little Mermaid doll releases and not so much in animated movies or TV shows. The Asylum. So in 2023, The Asylum, which is an independent film company who's already been sued by Disney in the past, created their own animated Little Mermaid movie to capitalize off the Little Mermaid live action release that came out earlier that summer. And when the film initially was released, because of the AI-generated movie poster, a lot of people believe this movie was AI-generated itself. However, if you watch the entire film, you can clearly tell that it's not AI, it's just really crappy computer animation. Now, since this movie was designed to be a mockbuster, it takes a lot of elements straight from the Disney film, like how the Little Mermaid, who's known as Surya in this movie, has an animal sidekick named Sheldon, who's very similar to Flounder, or how the king has a strict and harsh sidekick, but instead of a crab named Sebastian, it's a fish. One thing I will say though is I feel like people hate on this movie too much for its poor animation, because I still feel like it has pretty good voice acting and interesting plot changes to the fairy tale. I especially like how at the end of the movie, the grandmother was able to cast a spell that let Surya and Prince Lucas become either humans or mermaids when they held hands. Again though, the animation is pretty terrible. It's almost like the animators didn't understand basic human movement, because a lot of the characters will either shake their head way too much, make unnecessary awkward steps, or move their mouth just way too often. Burbank Animation. So I couldn't really find out a lot of information about Burbank Animation, but one thing I noticed straight off the bat was how the Little Mermaid's sister on the DVD cover bears a striking resemblance to Ariel, even though I'm not entirely sure if this movie was meant to be a mockbuster. Regardless though, one thing that's very unique about this movie is that the princess from the temple in this story is actually evil, and she along with her father plan on having her marry the prince, kill him, and steal all his money. Luckily though, the sea witch in this telling isn't really that bad, and gives the Little Mermaid, aka Miranda, her voice back so she can stop the wedding and reveal the king and princess's evil plans. Now the movie also has this strong environmental messaging, with one of the reasons Miranda wants to come up to the surface is to stop humans from polluting the oceans. So save the sea turtles and the mermaids, I guess. Ever After High. While The Little Mermaid doesn't appear in the Ever After High franchise, the quote-unquote role of the Little Mermaid is given to her daughter, Michelle Mermaid. Since Michelle was introduced towards the later end of the series, she's only the focus of one episode in which Ashlyn, Maddie, and Briar struggle to welcome her to Ever After High, only to find out that she was secretly a mermaid. Yeah, I always kind of thought this webisode was stupid, because not only is her last name Mermaid, but I mean, look at her appearance. But I guess since it's a kid's cartoon, I can suspend my disbelief a bit more. Fairytale Police Department. This 2002 German show follows the two protagonists, Johnny and Christine, who work as detectives for the Fairytale Land's police department. Every episode typically focuses on a fairy tale going awry, and the team trying to figure out a way to put the story back on track. In the Little Mermaid episode, the Little Mermaid ends up accidentally falling in love with Johnny, and Christine swims down to try and convince her to fall in love with the prince instead, but unfortunately gets transformed into a mermaid herself. Johnny then takes Little Mermaid down to the police station and tries various ways to talk her out of the marriage, but nothing works. The sea witch then uses her magical shell to become human and hypnotizes Johnny into falling in love with the Little Mermaid so that she can marry the prince for herself. Fortunately though, Christine comes just in time and uses the sea witch's shell to turn her back into a crab. The episode ends with the Little Mermaid falling in love with the prince instead, therefore successfully setting the fairy tale back on track. The Fairytaler. The Fairytaler is a Danish cartoon where each episode tells the story of a different fairy tale written by Hans Christian Andersen. One thing I will say about their Little Mermaid episode is that I believe it's actually the most accurate retelling of the story in an animated form on this list. I was also very surprised that they kept the original ending of this story for a kid's show, but you can tell they made it kid-friendly by watering down a lot of the mature elements of the fairy tale. For example, when the Little Mermaid dies and becomes a daughter of the air, the fairy tale makes it look like the Little Mermaid became some sort of rainbow fairy, if that makes sense. The show also doesn't mention the religious aspects of the story, like how the grandmother tells the Little Mermaid how humans die and gain an eternal soul in heaven. GoodTimes Entertainment. So GoodTimes Entertainment is this company that in the 90s and early 2000s made a bunch of mockbuster films to try and confuse people's grandmas into buying the wrong DVD. Now obviously since it's a mockbuster, they took a lot of elements from the Disney movie, like the animal sidekick, the wicked sea witch, heck even Prince Stefan looks like a bootleg Prince Eric. But what I really want to talk about is this movie's horrible pacing problem. The film is only about 48 minutes long, and Lena, the movie's Little Mermaid, makes the deal with Cassandra the Sea Witch only 10 minutes before the movie's over. The ending is so horribly rushed. Literally, the prince is about to marry the princess from the temple, but then the princess begs her father to let her marry her friend Maxwell, and the movie just ends. I know obviously these films are very cheaply made, but so many others on this list are also cheaply made and could at least somewhat storyboard a proper beginning, middle, and end. Reader's Digest. Okay, so don't ask me what Reader's Digest is because I couldn't seem to find anything about them. But anyways, in 1975, they released a short film called The Little Mermaid. Now, unlike other films on this list, there's no dialogue in the movie, as the narrator explains the entire story to the audience. But one thing I do find strange, though, is that you would think this would be the most accurate movie to the fairy tale, but they still changed certain aspects of the story, like making the Sea Witch the one who was responsible for the storm that hit the prince's ship. Regal Academy. The Little Mermaid makes her debut appearance in the season 2 episode titled A Mermaid's Tale. In this episode, Rose mysteriously wakes up with a tail and nobody in the Regal Academy faculty is able to help her, so they suggest to the class to find the Little Mermaid. Rose and her team go underwater but discover that the Little Mermaid has had her voice taken by the Sea Witch. They're successfully able to retrieve it back, but the Little Mermaid warns the group about a sea monster, which then proceeds to attack them. Fortunately though, the Little Mermaid is able to not only use her magic to give Rose back her legs, but also push the sea monster down into the depths of the ocean. Yeah, even though every other fairy tale is supposed to be old in this show, they do sometimes have some weird exceptions to the rule. Rusalochka. Rusalochka, or the Russian word for the Little Mermaid, is a 1968 short film produced in the former Soviet Union. The movie is told from the point of view of two narrators, with the tour guide telling the fairy tale from above the water, while the fish explains the tale to a group of her younglings beneath the bridge. One thing I found interesting about Rusalochka is that it played out more like a ballet than an animated film, with there being more of a heavy emphasis on music and character movement rather than on the actual dialogue between the characters. And similar to most films on this list, due to its short 27-minute runtime, the movie cuts out a lot from the original fairy tale, like the character of the grandmother and the Sea King, and even changes the dagger meant to kill the prince to a potion that will release a powerful storm. Shrek. The Little Mermaid makes a brief appearance in Shrek 2, in the scene where Fiona and Shrek are kissing on the beach. The tide washes Fiona out and the Little Mermaid in, and when Fiona comes back, she annoyingly throws the Little Mermaid into the ocean, where she's then eaten by sharks. Simsala Grimm. A lot of you guys have asked me in the comments to mention this show in my rankings, so I apologize for finally getting around to it, but for those who didn't know, Simsala Grimm is an animated German show that ran from 1999 to 2010. Each episode focuses on a different fairy tale, but contains the same two protagonists, the coyote Yo-Yo and a lizard named Doc Doc. Their role is somewhat to be the audience's narrator, but also will actively participate in the fairy tale by giving advice or helping the story's characters. Now in the episode centering around the Little Mermaid, the main character is aided by Doc Doc and Yo-Yo, who speak to her on behalf of the prince, as well as beg the witch to find out if there's another way the Little Mermaid can help save herself. Now, just like the Fairytaler, this version of the Little Mermaid goes with the original tragic ending, but the religious and more graphic elements of the story are still watered down for kid viewers. I also really like how in this ending, the Little Mermaid meets her own spirit prince, even though that's a bit confusing because they're all supposed to be daughters of the air, but I digress. Also, we all noticed that the prince's outfit was a direct rip-off of Prince Eric's wedding attire, right? So last on this list is Toei. So in 1975, Toei Animation, who is the company behind Sailor Moon, released their own version of The Little Mermaid. Now, throughout this video, I've mentioned you guys that a lot of other companies have copied Disney's version of the fairy tale. However, after watching this movie for myself, as well as a YouTube video that I'll link down below in the description, you can tell that Disney may be a bit guilty of being copycats themselves. However, to be completely fair, they really only copied some of the look of the shots, as well as very minuscule plot points like the Little Mermaid having a pet sidekick. I would even further argue that since Disney is such a powerhouse, most of the franchises on this list clearly probably saw the Disney film before the Japanese version. Regardless though, this movie follows the original fairy tale much closer, with Marina the Little Mermaid sacrificing herself in the end before going up to heaven. But one thing I want to lastly point out is the movie's main villain is the prince's crazy cat who wants to get Marina killed for some reason. I don't know, maybe it's because cats like eating fish bones and Marina is technically part fish, but I'll always just find this to be a really strange addition to the plot. Alright, so now it's time for the rankings. Number 13 is Shrek. I hate everything about this. I don't think showing the Little Mermaid getting eaten by sharks is funny at all. As a young child, this actually really upset me when I watched it in theaters, and I think it's tacky, crappy, and a mean-spirited joke for DreamWorks to pull. Number 12 is Fairytale Police Department. The Little Mermaid in this show is so annoying. Her British accent makes her sound like a spoiled little Victorian child, and she looks like a less Botoxed version of Angelica Pickle's mom in Rugrats. Number 11 is Reader's Digest. It's really hard to rank a character that doesn't speak at all in their movie, but I'll give her some points for not only having a somewhat cute design, but also having an adorable short film. But could the animators please just give their characters some color in their eyes? It's a bit jarring without it. Number 10 is the Fairytaler. As much as I appreciated how much they followed the original Fairytale, I'm not crazy about their Little Mermaid character. For starters, not only did the animators make her look way too much like a child, but her British voice actress doesn't do her any favors either. Number 9 is Ever After High. Usually Mattel comes up with very unique designs for their characters, so it's shocking and upsetting to me how much Michelle looks like Ariel. And to be honest, I don't really like her design. I prefer how she looks in the profile artwork, but in the cartoon, she just has way too much going on in her hair and on her dress. I also feel like her singing voice is surprisingly really terrible, so I wish they would have put more time and effort into this character. Number 8 is Rusalochka. If I was purely basing this ranking on the movie itself, I would rank Rusalochka a lot higher because I absolutely love how the filmmakers made the art style resemble shadow puppets. Unfortunately though, Rusalochka doesn't really have any personality in her movie, and her design is almost an exact copy of her sister's. However, I will give her some points because I felt like her singing voice in Russian was really beautiful. Number 7 is Burbank Animation. Don't get me wrong, I actually really like this Little Mermaid's look. It's not as much of an eyesore as a lot of other designs on this list. However, I find Miranda's voice to not only be a bit irritating, but her singing is annoying. I mean, she literally sings the same song about polluting the oceans 3 times in this film, and the song isn't even good. Number 6 is Toei. So I hate to place Marina so low on this list because I know a lot of people really like her. Maybe it's just because I watched this movie in Japanese and not in English, but I just wasn't really crazy about Marina. In fact, I'm a bit surprised at how boring her character design is, especially since her sisters look really cool. I mean, one of her sisters literally has a green afro. Also, could this girl please get a seashell bra because I am tired of seeing a literal nip slip every couple of minutes. Number 5 is Simsala Grimm. Usually in shows or movies like Simsala Grimm, the side characters tend to be annoying and add unnecessary commentary. But in all honesty, I really enjoyed this episode as well as Doc and Yo-Yo. I also think their version of The Little Mermaid had one of the best endings out of all of the entries on this list. My only complaint though would be, in all fairness, could they have made The Little Mermaid just a bit prettier? Number 4 is The Asylum. Despite the fact that this movie is really crappily animated, I still really like Surya as a character. I find her overall design to be pretty cute, and I think her voice actress suits her very well. I do believe, however, she should probably still get checked for her shaky head syndrome or something like that because her body movements are far from being natural. Number 3 is GoodTimes Entertainment. In all honesty, this film was a complete and utter boring mess, but I actually really enjoyed their version of The Little Mermaid. Lena has such a soft and sweet voice, and I'm a sucker for her design. I just love how her blonde hair, blue tail, and pearl crown work together. Number 2 is Regal Academy. I'm actually a little bit annoyed that The Little Mermaid wasn't a regular student at Regal Academy because I definitely think she would have added a lot of fun and interesting side plots for the show. Regardless, I really love her character design and like that the animators went for a more aquatic look with her blue skin and hair. I really just wish we could have seen a lot more of her in this series, but from the little they did show us, I found their Little Mermaid to be a very likable and beautiful character. Number 1 is Disney. There really is no comparison here. Ariel is like Gucci while the rest of Little Mermaids are Shein. But all jokes aside, Ariel is probably one of my favorite characters of all time. She has such a beautiful singing voice and her look is probably one of the most iconic and recognizable designs in all of Disney history. I've actually met Jodie Benson, the Little Mermaid's voice actress, while I worked at Disney, and she's one of the sweetest people. For years, I've loved not only watching The Little Mermaid, but also the prequel film, as well as the television series. However, I just want to acknowledge here and now that The Little Mermaid 2 completely ruined Ariel for me, and I'll continuously refuse and deny its existence like an illegitimate child. If you liked this video today and want to see more content in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will see you soon. Bye!